It's like America's Got Talent. Somebody comes out whose appearance is unexpected, stands out from the crowd, suddenly turns out to be able to sing or dance brilliantly, and the audience rises to it. And I think that's very much what happened there. Even though he may not have come from the same genteel background as the rest of the cast, talent will speak to the public in this way. So here's Eltinge moving into what's already established as a perfectly acceptable form of female impersonation in that context. And this is where all those rumors arise later on that he was a Harvard boy. He didn't go to college at all. He came out of a mercantile background. But in a way, it was necessary to connect him with something that was ivied in order to give respectability to him when he moved into the professional theater.
Nighttime am a falling, everything is still, and the moon am a shining from above. Cupid am a calling, every Jack and Jill, it's just about the time for making love. There's someone waiting all alone for me. No more hesitating, I must go and see. Howdy do, dear, it's with you, dear, that I love to be. Put your arms around me, honey, hold me tight.
1911 was a banner year for Julian Eltinge. That October, he starred in a new play, The Fascinating Widow, at the Liberty Theater on 42nd Street and Broadway. The show was written expressly for Eltinge by the legendary Otto Harbach, who would later author such standards of the Great American Songbook as Yesterdays, I Won't Dance, No No Nanette, and Smoke Gets in Your Eyes.
In 1911, I understand that Dad, Otto Harbach, wrote this play called The Fascinating Widow with Julian Eltinge. And I think it became a rather large hit for those days, too. Oscar Hammerstein took my father to a play that was on Broadway, and there was a lot of noise about it because it was supposed to be a hit, and it was. And it was Julian Eltinge, as I understand, as a woman or a girl, I don't know what age he was trying to play, but he was absolutely brilliant at it, but he had a voice that is awesome. I don't know if it was a girl's voice or a man's voice, but they saw the actual voice when he sang, and they did sing in the show, I take it, that he was awesome with this beautiful voice.
Put your arms around me, honey, hold me tight.
The play stars Eltinge as Hal Blake, a young college man in love with a debutante whose mother objects to their engagement and forbids her to see him. Blake has a rival whom he sets out to subdue by disguising himself as a woman, namely the Fascinating Widow. Gaining entrance to his beloved's home and making the rival fall in love with him in order to humiliate him. Complications carry Blake up to the verge of a marriage ceremony that forces him to disclose his sex and identity. In so compromising his rival, the mother is ultimately forced to see Blake as the better man and consents to their wedding. Eltinge's audience was completely enthralled by his dizzying series of transformations from one role to the other and back again. It was to become Julian's trademark. From then on, the scenarios of all of his shows and films contained dual masculine and feminine roles, deliberately written to showcase his talent for impersonation. After 10 long years of touring the world in vaudeville, Eltinge, now 30, had finally made it onto the legitimate stage, starring in a high-class musical on the Great White Way. Back then, even a glowing review from the New York Times could guarantee a play a run of only a couple of months. The Fascinating Widow closed at the Liberty after only 52 performances, but the show's immense popularity had generated interest from theater owners all over the country. Al Woods seized the opportunity and immediately launched Eltinge on a nationwide tour at a princely salary of $3,000 per week, the most ever earned by a stage performer up to that time. The show's first stop was at the Newark Theater, just across the Hudson River in New Jersey. The Fascinating Widow created such an uproar that before leaving the East, Eltinge returned to New York, where he packed the Grand Opera House for a one-week engagement. On the road, Eltinge broke box office records in nearly every town he played, even in Butte, Montana, the scene of his infamous childhood debut as a female impersonator. Within hours of the announcement of his appearance as the Fascinating Widow, excited mobs of women in small towns across America stormed local theaters to buy tickets, often making it necessary to add more performances. Many brought their children with them to see him. His presentation was so indisputably wholesome that he was universally regarded as a family act. The overwhelming success of the Fascinating Widow tour marked the zenith of Julian's early career. While Eltinge was out of town, his manager, Al H. Woods, was also hard at work, supervising the construction of the Eltinge Theater on 42nd Street in honor of his new star. Woods also launched the Julian Eltinge magazine, incorporated the Julian Eltinge Cosmetics Company, and marketed the Julian Eltinge cigar. In March 1914, after more than a 2-year absence, Eltinge returned to Broadway, this time in another Otto Harbach musical, The Crinoline Girl. The play was a huge hit, earning critical raves. As Tom Hale, a rich American in Europe, Eltinge falls in love with a socialite, but her father forbids him to see his daughter until he proves he can raise $10,000 on his own. To accomplish this, Tom sets out to solve a jewel robbery by tracking down a notorious thief known only as the Crinoline Girl. He finds her, drugs her, and dons her clothes. Posing as the Crinoline Girl, Tom recovers the stolen jewels, collects a reward of $25,000, and wins the hand of his sweetheart. Now that he was back in New York, Eltinge channeled his efforts into his new magazine. He personally wrote articles advising women on self-improvement, including everything from diet to attire to makeup. To improve their self-confidence, he encouraged women to take up the gentle art of boxing. Most mornings, Eltinge would routinely stop in at the Julian Eltinge Cosmetics Company on 14th Street before heading uptown to rehearse his next play. His cold cream formula was a particular favorite among housewives and shopgirls. Eltinge was committed to empowering these newly emerging middle-class women. He devoted himself to their betterment and wholeheartedly threw his support behind the suffragette movement. Although considered slightly odd by most men of his era, Eltinge enjoyed a real camaraderie with the new generation of modern women fighting for equality. Perhaps in acting as an agent for the liberation of women, he was also defining and liberating himself. To achieve his career goals, he had made sure to distance himself from other female impersonators who were banned by the high-toned theater crowd and relegated to performing in Bowery bars and dives. He insisted that he was a real man playing a female role, as had been the norm in Shakespeare's day. But he had few male fans. Most men made him an object of ridicule and the butt of mean jokes. W.C. Fields used to say, "When Julian Eltinge enters a room, the women swoon. The men head for the smoking room."
You'll notice that in almost all of his vehicles, the narrative is the one of the young man who, for a series of accidental reasons, has to dress up as a woman. This is what made it more acceptable. That very often he doesn't even want to do it, but he must perforce be a woman because of circumstances. Once he is a woman, he's great at it, and nobody questions how he suddenly became so good at it, but that is what made the difference.
Manager Al Woods staged boxing matches between Eltinge and legendary champions like Gentleman Jim Corbett. At his curtain call, Eltinge would tear off his wig and triumphantly light up a cigar. Such bravado could be counted on to draw a gasp from the women in the audience, but failed to impress the average Joe. George M. Cohan, Otto Harbach, and Jerome Kern acknowledged Eltinge as a royal showman when they made him a member of the exclusive Friars Club. But they were only business associates, never intimate friends. New York's well-heeled elite boasted that their city was America's center of sophistication and progressive thinking. In reality, they were light years away from accepting any bending of the gender line. Had Eltinge given even the slightest hint that he had homosexual leanings, his career would have been over. In spite of the material riches he had acquired and the acclaim he had achieved, the poor little poor kid had only grown into a poor little rich man. The Al Woods organization vigilantly protected its golden boy against frequent challenges to Eltinge's masculinity. The weekends he spent at his East Hampton estate were always chaperoned by bodyguards. Julian was left a sheltered, isolated person with only his mother and his possessions to comfort him. The East Hampton beach house, the mansion he owned in the New Jersey Palisades called Edgecliff, where he kept his expensive automobiles, and a 3-story townhouse on West 75th Street in Manhattan were among his vast holdings. In December 1915, Eltinge opened at the George M. Cohan Theater in Cousin Lucy. his best play yet. Written by Charles Klein, with music by Jerome Kern, Cousin Lucy tells the story of a man who fakes his own death, only to return as the beneficiary of his will, his female cousin, Lucy. It was the most ambitious show that Eltinge had tackled to date, a hilarious musical farce that showcased his comedic talents for the first time. 35 different gorgeous outfits were custom designed for his 160-pound figure, to the delight of his female admirers, who nicknamed him Mr. Lillian Russell, after the famous diva. However, for Julian, the daunting backstage changing ritual often drove him to near collapse. By now, the Eltinge Theater had been completed, but his audiences had grown so large that it simply couldn't accommodate them. Ironically, Julian Eltinge would never appear at the theater that displayed his name on the marquee. After slaving on the stage for more than 15 years, in one play after the other, Eltinge had grown tired of the grueling regimen of life on the road. Changing wardrobe from male to female dozens of times in each performance, in cramped dressing rooms with no air conditioning, was wearing him out. In the summertime, he often lost 10 pounds in one day. At a crossroads in his career, Eltinge was looking for new worlds to conquer. In 1915, he agreed to appear as himself in a cameo role in the silent motion picture comedy How Molly Malone Made Good. Julian really enjoyed the experience. It was so easy and a lot of fun. Best of all, he didn't have to learn songs or memorize lines. Unlike many of his fellow actors who mocked the new motion pictures as a passing fad, Eltinge saw them as the wave of the future. A born entrepreneur, he was quick to realize that the movies would eventually replace live variety shows, since mass audiences could watch them again and again at a cost of only pennies whenever they wanted to. He sent out feelers to the West Coast and didn't have to wait long for a reply. In 1917, the Lasky Paramount Company offered him a guaranteed contract to make 3 pictures in Hollywood. Eltinge didn't hesitate.